Today, we invite you to listen to a chilling story. My brother-in-law thought I was completely unaware of the times he sneaked into my bedroom whenever my husband was away. My silence was merely a way to bide my time until I had concrete proof. And then, when a tiny hidden camera captured the entire truth, I was left dead inside by what played out on the screen. It was an unimaginable secret, one capable of shaking an entire family to its core. If you want to uncover the dark truth behind this story, please sit back, listen, and immerse yourself in it right now. My name is Maya, and I am 31 years old. I have been married to my husband, Henry, for 4 years. We lived in a spacious 3-story suburban house in Oak Park, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, sharing the home with my parents-in-law and Henry's younger brother, Quinn. When I first became a bride, I thought I was incredibly lucky to have married a gentle, caring man who came from a respectable, traditional family. But gradually, living under the same roof began to expose dark corners that are hard to put into words. Quinn, my brother-in-law, was 23 years old. He had just graduated from college, and since he hadn't found a job yet, spent most of his time at home. On the surface, Quinn seemed like a quiet, mild-mannered guy. He was always ostensibly polite to me, and often helped carry groceries or do small chores around the house. At first, I thought he was a decent young man who knew his boundaries, but as time went on, I started noticing strange behaviors. Whenever Henry had to travel out of state for business, Quinn would always find some excuse to linger around my bedroom. At first, it was just knocking on the door to ask a random question or asking me to hand him a jacket drying on the balcony. Later, he would invent reasons to come into my room looking for a book or wanting to borrow my laptop. At times, I didn't think much of it, but gradually, the frequency of his appearances outside my bedroom door increased to the point where I felt suffocated. I mentioned it to Henry once, but he just laughed it off. He told me that his brother was just a young, clueless kid, that he was harmless, and that I shouldn't overthink things. Henry was naturally a kind-hearted guy who loved his brother deeply, and he believed I was just being overly sensitive, so he paid it no mind. But I grew more anxious by the day. There were late afternoons when Henry was stuck in downtown traffic, and I would be lying in bed resting. Suddenly, Quinn would push the door open and walk right in, claiming he was looking for a phone charger. But his eyes would covertly dart toward my bed, sending goosebumps erupting across my skin. I showed my visible discomfort and tried to kick him out tactfully. "This is my private bedroom, Quinn, not the living room where you can just walk in whenever you want. Next time you need something, text me. Don't just barge in like this." Quinn just gave a faint smirk, scratched his head, pretended to look embarrassed, and slowly sauntered out. After that incident, I became much more vigilant. I started locking my door every time Henry was away. But strangely, there were a few times I returned to my room and noticed that my belongings had been disturbed. A towel on my vanity wasn't folded exactly how I left it. A jar of expensive face cream was pushed to the side. Once, a dress I had hung in the closet was pulled down, sagging off its hanger. I shuddered. The fear in my chest grew day by day. Many nights, lying next to my husband, I wanted to tell him about these details, but I always hesitated. I knew Henry loved his brother and had a bit of a traditional, patriarchal mindset when it came to keeping the family peace. If I spoke bluntly, he might not believe me, and it could cause a massive rift between us. I forced myself to stay quiet and keep it to myself, but that silence only tormented me further. One afternoon, coming back from the grocery store, I caught Quinn staring down at me from the top of the staircase. That look was no longer innocent or clueless. It was a scrutinizing, invasive stare, hiding a dark curiosity that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I hurried into my room, locked the door, my heart hammering in my chest. At that moment, I knew I couldn't endure this ambiguity any longer. I needed proof. I needed the clear, undeniable truth to confront this, no matter how terrifying that truth might be. The next day, I sneaked out and bought a tiny, easily disguised spy camera from Amazon. I carefully placed it on the bookshelf in our master bedroom. The lens pointed toward the door, perfectly angled to capture anyone entering or leaving. After I set it up, I sighed, my hands trembling. I told myself that maybe I was just being paranoid, but it was better to be safe than sorry. I spent that entire day anxiously waiting. That evening, after dinner, Henry had to go meet a client. I pretended to have a migraine and excused myself to go to bed early. Quinn watched me walk away, his eyes holding a strange glint that I couldn't quite describe. I pulled the covers up and lay perfectly still, straining my ears to listen to every footstep in the hallway. Sure enough, a little while later, there was a soft knock on my door. I held my breath and didn't answer. The knocking stopped. Then, I heard the metallic click-clack of the doorknob turning. Thank God I had locked it thoroughly. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart beating like a war drum. Finally, the footsteps retreated, leaving behind a thick, suffocating silence. I couldn't sleep a wink that night, just waiting for the sun to rise so I could check the camera. Once Henry had left the house for work, I quickly connected my phone to the camera's app. Rewinding just a few clips was enough to send a cold sweat pouring down my spine. It was undeniable. During the time Henry was gone and I was pretending to sleep, Quinn had stood outside my door for a very long time. He tested the doorknob, looking around as if terrified of being caught. Then, he pressed his ear flat against the wood, clearly trying to listen to what was happening inside. The look in his eyes, the faint, twisted smile that flickered across his face, it chilled me to the bone. I shook uncontrollably, my hands gripping the phone tight. Everything I had suspected was no longer my imagination. Quinn was truly crossing a dangerous line. This was no longer innocent or mischievous behavior. I didn't know what to do next. Should I tell Henry immediately, or continue to observe secretly? A part of me desperately wanted my husband to understand and protect me, but another part feared he would accuse me of making things up, spinning the situation into a complete disaster. I sat frozen in front of the screen, utterly terrified. I felt as though a bomb had just detonated inside this seemingly peaceful suburban home, and I knew this was only the beginning of the stormy days ahead. That morning, after reviewing the footage, my hands shook so violently that I dropped my phone onto the bed. The soft thud made me jump, my heart threatening to leap out of my chest. I covered my face, tears streaming down my cheeks before I even realized I was crying. The truth was right there in front of me, but I couldn't bring myself to immediately show it to Henry. My biggest fear wasn't Quinn. It was my husband's reaction. Henry valued family above all else. Since they were kids, he had fiercely loved and protected his younger brother from every mistake. If I told him straight out, would he believe me, or would he think I was intentionally fabricating a story to drive a wedge between them? I was terrified of seeing disappointment in Henry's eyes, terrified of turning the family upside down based on my accusation alone. I tried to compose myself, hiding the camera back in its spot as if nothing had happened. Throughout the day, I quietly observed Quinn. He went about his normal routine eating with the family, speaking softly to his mother, joking with his father. But whenever his gaze flicked toward me, there was a flash in his eyes that made my skin crawl. It was as if he knew I was on guard, but was intentionally mocking me. That night, when Henry fell asleep, I lay with my back to him, my mind a tangled mess. I wanted to shake him awake, tell him everything, and shove the evidence in his face. But the words got stuck in my throat. The voices in my head whispered, "What if he doesn't believe you? What if he gets furious at you? If your mother-in-law finds out, what will she think of you?" Those questions tormented me until dawn. The next day, I decided to test the waters further. I secretly placed another hidden nanny cam. This time, I hid it inside a small teddy bear on my nightstand. The camera pointed directly at the bed, leaving no blind spots. I wanted to know exactly how reckless Quinn dared to be. Sure enough, that afternoon when Henry was at work, I pretended to go downstairs to help my mother-in-law cook dinner, intentionally leaving my bedroom door slightly ajar as if I had forgotten to close it. Less than 10 minutes later, I saw Quinn descending the stairs, his eyes shifting nervously. I pretended not to notice, continuing to chop vegetables, though my heart was pounding relentlessly. A moment later, I made an excuse to use the restroom and crept quietly up the stairs. Looking through the crack of the bedroom door, I saw Quinn's silhouette. He was no longer pretending to look for a charger. He was standing silently by my closet, his hand reaching out to stroke one of my dresses. I almost let out a scream but slapped my hand over my mouth just in time. I backed down the stairs, my heart feeling like it was going to burst. This was no longer a suspicion. Everything was terrifyingly clear. I hurried back to the kitchen, pretending to be busy so I wouldn't blow my cover. That night, when everyone was fast asleep, I quietly opened my phone to review the footage. What the camera captured was even more horrifying. Quinn didn't just touch my belongings. He sat down on my bed, grabbed my pillow, buried his face in it, and inhaled deeply in a bizarre, perverse manner. I shuddered, goosebumps covering my entire body. Tears of fear and humiliation welled up in my eyes. I knew I couldn't keep this a secret much longer. But how to say it, and when to say it, was an agonizing puzzle. I wanted to find the perfect, undeniable moment for Henry to see it with his own eyes, rather than just hearing it from my mouth. But the longer I waited, the more I felt myself being dragged into a dangerous vortex. The following day, I tried to keep my distance from Quinn, limiting any interaction. But that only made his abnormal behavior more glaring. During dinner, he sat across from me, shooting me covert glances, occasionally offering a cryptic smile. My mother-in-law didn't notice a thing. She just kept putting food onto her youngest son's plate, praising him relentlessly. Quinn is getting so mature. He cares about his sister-in-law, always helping around the house. Girls these days would be blessed to have a brother-in-law like him. Hearing her words, I felt a bitter lump in my throat. I looked over at Henry. He was happily eating and joking with his mom, completely oblivious to the dark undercurrents flowing through his own home. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up, point my finger at Quinn, and expose everything. But logic held me back. Without confronting Henry with the raw evidence at the perfect moment, I couldn't risk it. That evening, I gathered all my courage to sit down with Henry. I started gently. "Honey, I feel like Quinn has been acting really strange lately. I'm a bit worried." Henry looked surprised. "Strange how?" "He's the same as always. He's a good kid. He hasn't done anything." I bit my lip, planning to continue, but stopped. If I spilled everything right now, would Henry believe me? Or would he think I was a paranoid wife trying to bully his little brother? I looked into my husband's bewildered eyes and swallowed my words. I just shook my head. "Never mind. I'm probably just overthinking things." Henry chuckled and patted my head, comforting me like a child. But inside, my tension skyrocketed. I knew I couldn't prolong this indefinitely. One day, if Quinn crossed the ultimate line, I wouldn't be able to defend myself in time. That day came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, Henry had to take an emergency overnight business trip downstate to Springfield. I was left at home with my in-laws and Quinn. Late that night, after finishing the chores, I went up to my room and locked the door tightly. But around midnight, the knocking started again. This time, it was forceful and urgent. I held my breath, clutching my blanket, my heart hammering wildly. Then, a whisper slipped through the crack of the door. "Maya, are you asleep? Open the door for a second." My blood ran cold. Quinn had never addressed me directly by my first name like that before. I gripped my phone, my hands shaking, wanting to call Henry, but I was terrified of waking up my parents-in-law. The urgent knocking continued, then abruptly stopped. I sat curled up in the corner of my bed, not daring to move a muscle. A moment later, the footsteps faded away. The next morning, I rushed to check the camera. The footage left me dead inside. Quinn hadn't just stood there knocking. He pulled a small key out of his pocket and inserted it into the lock, trying to turn it. Thank God I had engaged the interior deadbolt, so he couldn't get in. Watching that scene, I shuddered. The situation had crossed into the realm of severe danger. I realized I had no other choice. I had to let Henry know the truth. The evidence was irrefutable. But when to tell him? And would Henry have the composure to handle it, or would he explode and tear the family apart? I sat numbly, my hands clutching the phone, holding that terrifying video, knowing that my peaceful life had completely collapsed from this exact second. I had kept this secret for far too long, and now it felt like a burning ember smoldering in my veins. After seeing Quinn use a key to try and access my room in the dead of night, I knew that if I hesitated any longer, The consequences wouldn't just be creepy stares or sneaking into my room. I couldn't let myself be pushed into a corner, and I absolutely could not accept this looming danger right inside my own private sanctuary. The next day, when Henry returned from his business trip, my mind was made up. I was going to tell him everything. No more beating around the bush, no more waiting. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, I was so silent that my mother-in-law had to point it out. "Maya, what's wrong with you lately? You barely eat, you don't talk, you don't smile. Are you missing your husband that much?" I pressed my lips together and forced a polite smile to brush it off. But Quinn's eyes kept darting toward me, cutting into my skin like a scalpel. I could feel my own anxiety mutating into pure hatred. After dinner, Henry asked Quinn if he wanted to go grab a beer. I immediately grabbed my husband's arm. "Henry, let's stay in tonight. I have something important I need to talk to you about." Henry looked at me, surprised. "What is it?" "Sounds serious." "It's about me." "And your brother." Hearing this, Quinn flinched slightly, but quickly regained his calm composure, even offering a faint smile as if he had nothing to hide. My hands were freezing. My heart was skipping beats. I waited until my parents-in-law had retired to their master suite on the first floor. I pulled Henry upstairs to our room, locked the door securely, and pulled out my phone. With trembling hands, I played the video clips for him. The screen lit up. The images played out. Quinn standing in front of our door, testing the knob, pressing his ear to the wood to listen. And finally, the scene of him inserting a key into the lock in the middle of the night. Henry sat frozen, his eyes glued to the screen. After a long moment, he suddenly shot up, his voice cracking. "This is impossible. Maya, where did you get this footage?" "I filmed it. I installed hidden cameras in our room." "Watch it, Henry. There are other clips too. I kept all of them. I'm not making this up. I wouldn't dare make up something like this about your brother." I sobbed, as the words tumbled out. All the repressed frustration and terror overflowed. But Henry's reaction was not what I had hoped for. He dragged his hands through his hair, pacing back and forth across the room, looking completely panicked. "Oh my God, how could this happen? How could he do this?" "Maya, are you sure? Could it be? Could it be a misunderstanding? He's still young and stupid. Maybe he was just curious." Hearing that, I stopped dead. My tears dried up instantly. I stared at my husband, the taste of bile in my mouth. "You call that curious?" A 23-year-old man standing outside his sister-in-law's bedroom door at midnight, using a key to try and break in? "You call that curious? Do you have any idea the kind of terror I've been living in?" Henry fell silent, his face pale. He knew I was right, but his heart was torn. On one side was the ugly, naked truth about his own flesh and blood. On the other was his wife's agonizing pain. I saw the weakness in his eyes, and it filled me with despair. Finally, Henry slumped down onto the bed, buried his face in his hands, and sighed. "Let me talk to him. Don't tell Mom and Dad yet. We need to handle this slowly." "Slowly?" I let out a bitter laugh. "How slow do you want to take it? Until he breaks the door down and forces himself on me?" That question made Henry freeze. He didn't answer. He just sat in silence. And that silence was like a knife cutting even deeper into my soul. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I watched Henry walk out into the hallway and stand in front of Quinn's door for a very long time. He didn't knock. He didn't go in. He just stood there and eventually walked back to bed. I knew he was paralyzed by indecision. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was unnaturally heavy. I went down to the kitchen to help my mother-in-law cook breakfast, but my mind was a chaotic mess. I couldn't focus. When we sat down at the table, Quinn was laughing and chatting as if absolutely nothing had happened. He even proactively served me some food. "Eat up, Maya. You looked really tired yesterday." I dropped my fork and glared at him with ice-cold eyes. He just gave a faint smirk, completely unfazed. That sheer audacity terrified me even more. After breakfast, Henry dragged Quinn up to his room. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, my heart racing, straining to listen. The voices were muffled, but Henry's tone was sharp. "Quinn, I want to ask you straight up. Why were you standing outside my bedroom door in the middle of the night? What were you trying to do?" Quinn hesitated, then let out a heavy sigh. I'm sorry, I was just curious. Maya is always locked in her room. I made a stupid mistake. I didn't mean any harm. Listening to this, I wanted to scream. That despicable excuse again. Curiosity. I stormed up the stairs and threw the door open. Curious? You were so curious you used a key to try and open my door. So curious you sat on my bed going through my things and sniffing my pillows. Quinn, what do you take me for? Quinn's face paled, but he immediately got defensive. I admit I was wrong, but don't blow this out of proportion. I said I was sorry. I promise I won't do it again. Henry turned to me, his eyes pleading. Maya, please listen to me. Let him keep his promise. He's my brother. I'll keep an eye on him. I won't let it happen again. I looked at my husband, a storm raging inside me. So this was it? Everything I had endured, all the trembling and fear over the past months, was ultimately traded for a half-hearted apology from Quinn and a plea for a second chance from Henry? I let out a hollow laugh, turned around, and walked out, tears streaming down my face. I knew this tragedy was only just beginning. Quinn showed zero genuine remorse, and my husband had chosen the path of a protector for the perpetrator. Someday, I would have to face something far more horrifying. After that confrontation, I thought Quinn would at least be wary and keep his distance from me. But no, I was wrong. His cold, nonchalant attitude after that pathetic apology made me realize that deep down, Quinn wasn't afraid at all. In fact, he looked down on me even more. Perhaps he knew that no matter how hard I fought back, Henry would always be the one standing in the middle, finding a way to smooth things over and protect his little brother. In the days that followed, I lived under a crushing weight. By day, I had to pretend everything was normal in front of my in-laws, smiling while my heart felt like it was anchored by a boulder. By night, I locked my door tight, curled up, hugging a pillow, my heart racing at every tiny noise in the hallway. Henry tried to act calm, sometimes attempting to comfort me. Don't overthink it anymore. I talked to him. He promised he won't do it again. I looked at my husband, feeling nothing but profound sadness. What value does a verbal promise hold? Was the camera footage not enough for him to believe his brother was capable of far worse? The fear inside me morphed into deep-seated resentment. I became highly vigilant. I carried my phone everywhere, installed an extra latch lock on the inside of the bedroom door, and even kept a small pair of scissors under my pillow as a desperate form of self-defense. But the more defensive I became, the bolder Quinn acted. One afternoon, while I was hanging laundry on the rooftop deck, Quinn came up, pretending to look for clothesline wire. I quietly stepped aside, trying to maintain my distance. Suddenly, he dropped a half-joking, half-serious remark. You always avoid me like the plague, Maya. Are you really that scared of me? I jolted and turned around, our eyes locking. The lopsided smirk on his face sent a chill down my spine. I didn't answer. I just coldly walked past him and went downstairs. But inside, a tsunami of anxiety surged through me. That night, I told Henry about it, my voice trembling with anger. You see, he's exactly the same. He hasn't changed at all. I cannot endure this forever. You have to do something. Henry sighed and wrapped his arms around me. I know, but please calm down. He's young. He'll grow out of it. I can't blow this up. Mom and Dad would have a heart attack. Hearing him mention his parents made the bitter reality set in. Clearly, my position in this house was just an outsider. Meanwhile, Quinn, as the youngest son, would be forever forgiven and sheltered. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pack my bags and leave immediately. But thinking about our future, about the legal and emotional ties of our marriage, I forced myself to stay quiet. Another evening, when Henry was out late entertaining clients, I was sitting in my room when I heard frantic knocking on my door. I jumped, clutching the scissors I had hidden. Then, a low voice called out, Maya, open the door. I need to talk to you. I held my breath and didn't answer. The door remained locked, but the knocking grew louder and louder, making me shake uncontrollably. I grabbed my phone and started recording, my hands trembling. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. I listened closely and heard him retreat to his own room. The next morning, I reviewed the hallway camera footage. Once again, I was left paralyzed. Quinn had stood in front of the door for a very long time, his eyes glued to the keyhole, his lips muttering something. He tested the knob a few times, then pressed his face against the crack of the door, taking a deep breath as if trying to smell the air inside. I gasped for air, nausea shooting up to my brain. I shoved the clip into Henry's hands, my voice shaking violently. "Do you still want to cover for him? If something happens to me one day, are you going to be able to live with your brother's promise?" Henry watched the video, his face turning ghostly pale. He slammed his fist onto the desk. Jesus Christ, how did he turn into this? I'll talk to him again. If he does this one more time, I won't let him off. I laughed bitterly. One more time? How many one more times is it going to take? He's not stopping. I could clearly see that Henry was still lying to himself. That day, Henry dragged Quinn out of the house. I don't know what was said. When Henry returned, he was silent and just told me not to worry. But from the look Quinn gave me, I knew he wasn't scared at all. He was more arrogant than ever. Sure enough, a few days later, when I returned from the grocery store, I walked into my room and saw my nightgown, which had been hanging in the closet, thrown onto the floor. Trembling, I checked the room. I discovered that the hidden nanny cam inside the teddy bear had been turned completely upside down. Quinn had found it. I broke out in a cold sweat. So my only shield, my video evidence, was no longer a secret. If Quinn knew about it, he would become even more reckless. He had nothing left to hold him back. I collapsed onto the bed, tears streaming down my face. In this house, I was truly, completely alone. That night, I tried to talk to Henry about moving out into our own place. But the moment I opened my mouth, he frowned. "What are you talking about? My parents are getting older. I'm the eldest son. I can't just leave. Besides, if we move out, who's going to take care of them? You're acting like an outsider." I was dead silent. So my safety was worth less than the filial piety Henry chained himself to. I lay facing the wall, tears rolling down my cheeks. A sudden thought flashed in my mind. If I don't save myself, no one will. And I knew that something far more horrific was approaching. After the night I found the camera turned upside down, I realized that all my previous precautions were compromised. Quinn knew I was surveilling him. Thinking about it made me shake, sweat pouring out of me as if I had just walked through a nightmare. But this nightmare wasn't in my sleep. It was existing right here in the house I lived in every single day. I paced my room all morning, feeling like I was walking on hot coals. I didn't dare step out much, not wanting to run into him. Only one thought echoed in my head. I have to save myself. No one else can do it for me. Henry was still hiding from the truth, choosing the path of least resistance. My in-laws still looked at Quinn with nothing but doting affection. If I spoke up, I might not even be protected. Thinking it over, I decided to take a much riskier step. I bought a brand new camera. This time, I didn't put it in the bedroom. I installed it right out in the hallway, pointing directly at my bedroom door. I wanted to record exactly what was happening outside, where it couldn't be disputed. That night, while the house was fast asleep, I quietly mounted the camera in the corner of the ceiling, disguising it as a small motion sensor. From that day on, I lived in a state of constant fear and high tension. Quinn seemed to know I was on guard, but he didn't stop. In fact, his stares became even more brazen. Sometimes, while the whole family was eating dinner, Quinn would openly stare at me and then smile. That smile made my skin crawl, but no one else at the table noticed a thing. One afternoon, while I was cooking with my mother-in-law, I heard Quinn's footsteps approach from behind. He stood entirely too close and mockingly asked, "Need some help, Maya?" I jumped, stumbling to the side, my hands shaking in fear. My mother-in-law noticed and frowned. "What's wrong with you, Maya?" "He wants to help. Let him help." "Why are you acting so weird?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a laugh. I just thought the kitchen was getting too crowded, Martha." I glanced at Quinn and caught his eyes flashing with a mocking amusement, as if he was intentionally trying to provoke me. I looked away, but a fierce determination rose within me. I couldn't remain this weak forever. That night, I checked the new hallway camera. My heart clenched when I saw Quinn standing in front of my door again. He didn't knock, and he didn't try to open it. He just stood perfectly still, staring intensely at the door, his lips moving. I zoomed in on the video. I could clearly see him whispering, "One day, you'll have to open the door." I shuddered, ice in my veins. Those words felt like a declaration of war, a dark shadow casting itself over my entire life. The next morning, I showed the clip to Henry. He just sat there looking exhausted and sighed. "He's sick. He must have a psychological issue. I'll take him to see a therapist." I angrily slapped his hand away. "Keep making excuses for him. Wait until something happens to me. It'll be too late for regrets." "I'm telling you the truth, Henry. If this continues, I am packing up and going back to my parents' house in Wisconsin. And when I do, don't blame me for breaking up this family." Henry remained silent, his eyes red. I knew he was suffering, but my disappointment had already seeped too deep into my bones. From that day on, I started preparing my own contingency plan. I changed the passcode on my phone. I uploaded all the video clips to a secure cloud drive, just in case my phone disappeared. I wrote a clear note: "If anything happens to me, open these videos." I hid the piece of paper inside a book in my closet, a final failsafe. I also cleverly invited my best friend, Lauren, the only person I fully trusted, to come over a few times. I told my in-laws I missed my friend, but the reality was I needed a witness. Quinn seemed visibly annoyed seeing Lauren and me together, but he didn't dare act out in the open. One evening, when Lauren was leaving late, we stood outside the driveway talking. Quinn walked past us, his cold eyes locking onto mine before he let out a faint smirk. Lauren noticed and pulled my arm, whispering, "The way he looks at you isn't normal. You need to be careful, Maya." I nodded, my throat tightening. That night, when I returned to my room, I checked the hallway camera. The footage was even more horrifying. After Lauren and I had stepped outside, Quinn was standing right by the staircase, his eyes glued to my bedroom door, his face twisted into something truly sinister. He smiled softly, then pulled a heavy keyring out of his pocket, inspecting it for a very long time. I nearly fainted. It was painfully obvious that Quinn was preparing for a much more aggressive move. The next morning, I didn't hesitate. I looked Henry dead in the eye, my voice hard as steel. "I am going to say this one last time. If you do not get me out of this house, I will leave on my own. I cannot take this anymore." Henry was stunned. But catching a glimpse of Quinn standing at the top of the stairs, looking down with eyes as cold as a blade, I knew my words weren't just an empty threat. I had officially entered a war, and I understood that from this moment on, any mistake would cost me my own safety. That night, after issuing the ultimatum to Henry, I had absolutely no energy left. I sat quietly in the room, my eyes fixed on the door, terrified it would burst open at any second. Henry sat next to me, holding my hand, but his grip offered no comfort. Deep down, I knew he still lacked the resolve to cut ties and stop enabling his brother. Around midnight, when the whole house was fast asleep, I drifted into a fitful slumber. Suddenly, a metallic click-clack echoed from the bedroom door. I bolted awake, my eyes wide. That sound wasn't the wind, and it wasn't mice. It was the sound of metal sliding into the lock cylinder. I shot up and aggressively shook my husband. "Henry, wake up! There's someone at the door." Henry scrambled out of bed and lunged for the light switch. Sure enough, the doorknob was vibrating gently, as if someone was actively twisting a key. I trembled, hugging Henry's arm tight. A moment later, the noise stopped. We stood in dead silence, listening to the footsteps retreat. Henry's face was ash-white. He didn't say a word. I looked at him bitterly. "There. Do you have anything else to say? What if I had been alone in here tonight?" The next morning, I checked the hallway camera. The footage was crystal clear. Quinn was standing in front of our door, holding a keyring, trying one key after another. His face displayed a twisted, obsessive patience. Watching it, Henry just buried his head in his hands, sighing in pure despair. I looked at my husband, feeling conflicted. I loved him, but I despised his cowardice. That afternoon, Henry called Quinn into the home office. I stood outside, my heart burning with anxiety, listening to the argument unfold. Henry raised his voice. "Quinn, what the hell are you trying to do? Why are you doing this to Maya? Quinn was quiet for a long time. Then, unexpectedly, he let out a scoffing laugh. Do you really think Maya is so innocent she doesn't know what's going on? She's just playing the good girl. Haven't you noticed? Every time you leave on a business trip, she purposely ignores me, plays hard to get. But the way she looks at me, it's not normal. Why don't you ask her yourself? I was dizzy. That was a blatant, fabricated lie. But what was truly terrifying was how confident Quinn's voice sounded, as if he actually believed his own psychotic delusions. Henry fell silent. He didn't respond. I clenched my fists, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't believe Quinn wasn't just acting out. He had the audacity to invent a story to warp the truth. That evening, the atmosphere in the house was suffocatingly tense. I couldn't eat a bite. I just stared at Henry, waiting for him to speak up. But he remained silent. After dinner, I pulled him into our room and broke down in tears. What does your silence mean? Are you doubting me now? Henry held his face, his voice choking up. I don't doubt you. But I genuinely don't know what to do anymore. He's my blood brother. I can't expose him in front of Mom and Dad. That answer was the final knife twisting in my gut. I pushed his hands away, turned to the wall, and let absolute isolation wash over my soul. In the days that followed, Quinn grew even more brazen. He no longer hid his intentions. He openly stared at me during meals. Once, when I was walking down the stairs, he intentionally blocked my path, leaning in to whisper in my ear. Stop pretending, Maya. Sooner or later, you're going to belong to me. I jolted, shoved him hard, and ran straight to my room, my heart hammering. But when I told Henry, he just held his head and shook it. He's crazy. He's literally gone crazy. But crazy or sane, I knew Quinn was incredibly dangerous. And then, the fateful night arrived. Henry had an emergency business trip out of state. He barely had time to tell me to lock the doors before he left. I nodded, but inside, I was terrified. I locked the bedroom door, slid every deadbolt into place, and even dragged a heavy chair to jam under the handle. Around midnight, the knocking started. This time, it was louder and more aggressive than ever. I trembled, gripping the scissors hidden under my pillow. Maya, open the door. I know you're not asleep. Quinn's voice bled through the wood, hissing with obsession. I covered my ears, tears pouring down my face. The knocking and rattling of the handle lasted for nearly 10 minutes before it abruptly stopped. I didn't dare breathe, my whole body stiff. A moment later, I heard his footsteps recede. But just as I thought I was safe, a loud crack echoed through the room. The door shook violently. The deadbolt sounded like it was about to snap off the frame. I screamed, lunging forward to hold the doorknob, yelling through the crack. Quinn! If you dare step into this room, I will expose you to the whole family. I swear to God. The hallway went quiet for a moment. Then, a dry laugh echoed through the wood. Go ahead. Let's see who Henry believes. The footsteps walked away. I slumped to the floor, my body turning to jelly, drenched in sweat. The next morning, I checked the hallway camera. The footage showed Quinn standing at the door, violently ramming his shoulder into the wood, his face contorted, his eyes bloodshot. I knew the boundary of safety had officially been shattered. Trembling, I picked up my phone and called Henry. When I told him what happened, he was silent for a long time. Then, his voice cracked. Okay, I will get you out of that house. We will rent an apartment. I cannot let you stay there one more day. Hearing those words, the tears finally fell. Henry had finally made a choice. But the fear inside me hadn't subsided because I knew Quinn wouldn't just let it go. And the coming days would be when the real war began. After that terrifying night, when Henry finally uttered the words, I will get you out of that house, I saw a tiny ray of light in the pitch-black darkness. But that relief only lasted a moment before it was replaced by anxiety. It's easy to say, but actually leaving this house and severing ties with Quinn's psychotic obsession was going to be anything but simple. In the following days, Henry started looking for a rental. He used his lunch breaks to sneak out and view apartments in the city with his coworkers, terrified to tell his parents for fear they would have a meltdown. Meanwhile, every night, I locked the door and lived like a prisoner in my own home. I barely left my room, unless it was absolutely necessary. Because every time I ran into Quinn, his eyes looked like they wanted to devour me. One afternoon, while I was folding laundry, Henry whispered to me, "I found a small apartment in the South Loop, near the office. It's not huge, but it's enough for the two of us. Just hold on a few more days. I'll sign the lease, and we'll move." Hearing him say that, my heart swelled with joy and sorrow. I gripped his hand tightly, choking on my tears. As long as we get out of here, I don't care about luxury. I just want peace. But that hope was quickly suffocated. The next day, at dinner, when Robert, my father-in-law, asked Henry if he planned on buying some investment properties, Henry nervously laughed and said he didn't have any plans yet. Suddenly, Quinn chimed in, his tone casual. "I heard Henry is looking for a private apartment. Why are you keeping it a secret from Mom and Dad?" I froze. My fork dropped into my bowl. Martha, my mother-in-law, glared at us. "A private apartment? Henry, is this true? Are you really going to abandon your parents and your brother?" Henry stammered, flustered. I was just looking for a place closer to the office, for the commute." Robert slammed his fist on the table, his voice booming. "Nonsense. You have a massive house right here, and you won't stay in it? You want to go rent some tiny shoebox out there. What kind of married couple splits from the family like that? The whole neighborhood will laugh in our faces." I kept my head down, my heart pounding. I knew Quinn had brought it up intentionally to cut off our escape route. The look he gave me was full of pure defiance. That night in our room, I sobbed heavily. "You see, he's not going to let us be. I'm so scared. I'm terrified that one day he's going to do something desperate." Henry hugged me, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry. I'll find a way. No matter what, I have to get you out of here." But I knew that to do that, Henry had to fight his own family, something he had never had the courage to do before. The ensuing days were suffocating. Martha was visibly cold toward me. She frequently made passive-aggressive comments. A good daughter-in-law takes care of her husband's family. Some people only care about themselves, trying to isolate their husbands from their parents and siblings. It's disgraceful. Hearing those words, I stayed silent, swallowing the bitter pill. Quinn became even more brazen. Once, returning from the grocery store, I found him standing right by the front gate, staring at me. He smirked. "If you leave, Maya, I'm going to be very sad. Don't you care about me?" I shuddered, clutching my grocery bags, and hurried inside without replying. But that sentence haunted me all night. One evening, when Henry had a one-day trip to Springfield, I heard strange noises outside my door again. I quickly opened the camera app on my phone. My heart nearly stopped. Quinn was standing there, holding what looked like metal pliers or lock picks, messing with the edge of the lock cylinder. Trembling, I clutched my phone. I wanted to call my in-laws downstairs, but I was too afraid. My only option was to scream through the door. "Quinn! If you keep doing that, I'm calling 911. The noise stopped. The camera showed Quinn freezing in place, then slowly looking up directly into the lens. He gave a twisted, crooked smile. That smile sent a shock of ice down my spine. Then, he turned and walked away, as casually as if he hadn't done a thing. The next morning, I showed Henry the clip. He sat completely paralyzed, his hands clenched into fists, shaking violently. It took him a long time to finally speak. "I can't tolerate this anymore. If my parents don't understand, then so be it. But I cannot leave you here another day." Hearing that, my tears spilled over, a mix of pain and relief. However, my fears materialized when Henry brought up moving out to his parents. The house erupted. Robert furiously slammed the table. Martha cried hysterically, accusing me of brainwashing her son. Quinn sat perfectly still, but the corner of his mouth twitched in deep satisfaction. He had succeeded in painting me as the villain, tearing the family apart. I stood there in silence, not knowing what to say. Henry tried to explain, but every word he spoke was dismissed by his parents. Finally, Martha pointed a trembling finger right at my face. "This is all your fault. If it weren't for you, my boys would never fight. You are a selfish, wicked woman." I choked up, tears streaming down my face. In that moment, I saw exactly how utterly alone I was. But at the same time, a new resolve ignited inside me. If no one would believe me, I would force the truth into the light myself. That night, I quietly copied all the video files from the cameras onto a small flash drive and slipped it into my pocket. I knew that sooner or later, I was going to have to use it, because Quinn wasn't going to stop. And if I didn't prepare, I would lose everything. The look in his eyes over the past few days was like a predator on a hunt. The more he was blocked, the more vicious he became. I shuddered, imagining the horrific scenario. One day, if he actually picked that lock, what would I be facing? In the pitch-black room, I sat alone, listening to the ticking clock, and I knew the real storm was rapidly approaching. After being berated by my mother-in-law in front of the entire family, I completely broke down. I sat in my room, burying my face in my hands, crying until I had no tears left. Everything I had tried to endure, the evidence I had painstakingly gathered in the end, it just turned me into the homewrecker. But amidst the humiliation, a different fire sparked to life. If no one was going to stand by me, I was going to drag the truth into the light myself. That night, I lay huddled under the blankets, my eyes wide open. Henry sat silently beside me, his face a portrait of helplessness. He loved me, but his family ties chained him down. It was his hesitation that drove me to more despair than even Quinn's recklessness. Around midnight, when everyone was deep asleep, I suddenly heard the hallway door click open. I held my breath, straining my ears. The footsteps were incredibly light, but I recognized them immediately. It was Quinn. The steps grew closer to my room. I hurriedly pulled up the hallway camera feed on my phone. The screen clearly showed Quinn holding a bundle of keys, approaching my door, his eyes wide and manic, like a hunting animal. My heart hammered in my chest. My hand trembled as I gripped the scissors under my pillow. Henry was sleeping soundly, completely unaware. I wanted to wake him up, but I was terrified that any noise would make Quinn act even more erratically. The door gently rattled. The lock clicked. I gasped, cold sweat running down my spine. A second later, a loud snap echoed, and the door swung open. I let out a blood-curdling scream. "Henry, wake up!" Henry jolted awake just as Quinn pushed into the room. His eyes were bloodshot, his face contorted. I cowered back, dropping the scissors. Henry lunged forward, grabbing his brother by the shoulders. "Quinn, what the hell are you doing?" Quinn thrashed around, screaming like a lunatic. "Why does she always avoid me? She belongs to me. You don't deserve her." Those words were a dagger plunged straight into my heart. I froze, staring at Henry in utter shock, my eyes wide with horror. The room devolved into absolute chaos, screaming, shoving, heavy breathing. Martha and Robert heard the commotion and rushed upstairs. The scene before them stopped them dead in their tracks. Quinn was pinned by Henry, while I was huddled in the corner of the bed, pale as a ghost. "What is going on here?" Martha screamed. I choked back a sob, tears streaming down my face. "Martha, it's Quinn. He's tried to get into my room so many times. I have all the proof." Trembling, I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and jammed it into my MacBook. The videos started playing one by one. Quinn standing at the door trying keys, sitting on my bed, sniffing my pillows. The obsessive, terrifying look in his eyes. The entire family was dead silent. Martha backed away, shaking. Robert's face turned bright red. Henry was pale, sweat dripping from his forehead. Watching the screen, Quinn initially yelled in protest, but then he suddenly burst out laughing. "So what? It's all just because I love her too much." That sentence shattered the entire family. I broke down and screamed. "Love? You call sneaking around, violating my privacy, and destroying my life, love? What kind of sick game are you playing?" Henry clenched his fists, his eyes full of agony. He couldn't bring himself to hit his own brother, and he didn't know how to salvage the situation. Robert slammed his hand against the desk, his voice shaking with rage. "You degenerate bastard. Is this how I raised you?" Martha burst into tears, grabbing Quinn's arm and wailing. "No, my son wouldn't do this. He just made a stupid mistake. It's just a phase." I watched the scene with a bitter taste in my mouth. It turns out that no matter how naked the truth is, someone will always find a way to make excuses. I felt like a total stranger in this house. I stood up, my voice cracking but absolute. If he stays in this house another day, I am leaving. I cannot live in terror any longer. The room fell silent. Henry kept his head down, his hands shaking. He knew I was serious this time. If he didn't make a choice, I would walk away. Quinn smirked, shooting me a cold glare. It doesn't matter where you go. I'll find you. That threat sent a shiver through my body, but it simultaneously solidified my resolve. I couldn't let myself be imprisoned by this psychopath's sickness anymore. After the family dispersed in silence, I sat alone, crying into my hands. Henry sat down next to me, taking my hand and whispering, "I'm so sorry. I let you endure too much. Tomorrow, we are leaving. I don't care what my parents say." I looked at him through blurry, tear-filled eyes. I felt both love and deep pain for him. I knew this decision would fracture his family, but if I didn't leave, I would lose myself entirely. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat by the window, staring out into the pitch-black sky. I knew tomorrow would open a new, stormy chapter, and I also knew Quinn wouldn't let me go that easily. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house felt like a giant boulder pressing down on everyone's chest. No one spoke a word to each other. Breakfast became a silent pantomime. I sat there, unable to swallow a single bite, my eyes red from a sleepless night. Henry sat quietly, his face gaunt. Quinn acted as if nothing had ever happened, eating casually, occasionally glancing up at me with a cold stare and a defiant smirk. After breakfast, Henry pulled me into our room and whispered, "Get your stuff ready." I called the landlord for the apartment in the South Loop. "We can move in temporarily this afternoon. I'm not waiting any longer." Hearing that, I almost burst into tears, hugging him tightly. This was the only ray of light I had left to cling to, my only hope to escape the obsession that had haunted me for so long. I hurriedly packed. Not much, just some clothes, basic necessities, and most importantly, the flash drive containing all the video evidence, my lifeline, if things took a turn for the worse. I packed carefully, feeling a mix of anxiety and relief. That afternoon, when we were about to carry our bags downstairs, Martha suddenly blocked the doorway, tears in her eyes. "Henry, you're leaving? You're really abandoning your parents? Abandoning your little brother? Your wife put you up to this, didn't she?" Robert stood next to her, his face red, his hands shaking. "If you step foot out of this house, you are no longer a son of mine." Henry stood paralyzed, his eyes wavering as he looked at me. My heart felt like it was in a vice grip. I knew this moment would decide everything. I squeezed his hand tightly, my voice shaking. "Henry, if you hesitate now, I will leave by myself. But I cannot stay here." His eyes were full of anguish. Then, he gave a faint nod. He turned to his parents, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry, but I cannot let my wife live in fear anymore." Saying that, he pulled my hand and we walked out. Martha collapsed to the floor, sobbing loudly. Robert yelled after him, but Henry didn't turn back. Tears welled up in my eyes, my heart aching. After all, they were my in-laws, my family. But if I didn't leave, I might literally lose my life in that house. When we reached the driveway, I caught a glimpse of Quinn leaning against the brick wall, his eyes burning like fire. He looked at us, a chilling smile on his face that made me tremble. I knew he wasn't going to let this go. Sure enough, that very night, right after we moved into the new apartment, Henry's phone rang nonstop. It was Quinn. Henry frowned and ignored the calls. But a few minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. "Maya, did you really think you could escape me just by moving out? I'll find you." My legs gave out. My hands shook violently, and my entire body went ice cold. Henry read the text, his face turning pale. He quickly tried to reassure me. "Don't be scared. Let me handle this." But I knew that threat wasn't empty. Quinn was really going to come looking for me. And just as I feared, in the days that followed, we were constantly followed. Once, when I went to a grocery store near the apartment, I jumped, spotting a familiar silhouette in the distance. Quinn was standing there in a black hoodie, his eyes locked on me. I hurried away, my heart pounding, clutching my bags tight. When I told Henry, he growled, "If he follows you again, I'm calling the Chicago PD. I can't tolerate this anymore." I just nodded, but my mind was still in a panic. I knew calling the police wasn't that simple. We needed concrete proof of stalking, and Quinn was too smart to do anything overtly illegal in public. One night, when Henry was traveling for work, I was home alone in the apartment. I was reading a book when I suddenly heard frantic knocking at the door. I jumped, my heart stopping. I crept over and looked through the peephole. It was Quinn. He was standing right outside the door, his face darkened, his eyes full of obsession. I panicked, backing away, my hands shaking as I grabbed my phone to call Henry, but it went straight to voicemail. I called my best friend, Lauren. My voice was shaking. "Lauren, you have to get here right now. Quinn is outside my door." Lauren panicked and told me to lock the deadbolts and absolutely not open the door. I clutched the scissors in my pocket, my heart hammering. Outside, Quinn pounded on the door relentlessly, hissing through his teeth. "Maya, open the door. I know you're in there. Don't make me crazy." The knocking grew louder and more violent. Panicking, I turned on the indoor security camera to record everything. It took almost half an hour for Lauren to arrive. When Quinn heard her calling for me from the lobby intercom, he finally gave up and left. I slumped to the floor, sobbing like I had run a marathon. Lauren hugged me, furious and sympathetic. "He's completely psychotic now. Maya, you have to file a police report. You can't just keep waiting for Henry to do something." I nodded, but I was deeply conflicted. Reporting Quinn meant tearing the family apart permanently. My in-laws would be devastated, but if I didn't, I wouldn't survive. That night, when Henry got home, I showed him the video of Quinn pounding on the apartment door. He sat in dead silence, then buried his head in his hands and cried. It was the first time I had ever seen Henry cry like a child. He choked out, "I'm so sorry, Maya. I feel so helpless. But this time, I'm going all the way. I don't care what my parents say. I have to protect you." Hearing him say that, I let out a sob. After all the humiliation and terror, someone was finally taking my side. But simultaneously, I knew the storm was about to hit us harder than ever. Because Quinn wasn't going to let this go easily. Sitting in the small apartment, looking out at the city lights, my heart was incredibly heavy. I knew this war wasn't over. It had only just begun. Ever since the night Quinn tracked us down to the new apartment, I lived in a constant state of hypervigilance, like a fugitive on the run. Every time I heard a noise in the hallway, my heart skipped a beat. Grocery shopping, going to work no matter where I was, I felt like someone was watching me. Quinn's shadow was a nightmare constantly stalking me, denying me a single day of peace. Henry was just as stressed. He constantly checked the locks, bought extra security deadbolts, and even installed a small alarm system on the front door. But I knew perfectly well that these were just thin layers of defense. A man crazy enough to try breaking my bedroom door down in the middle of the night would have no problem figuring out how to break into an apartment. One afternoon, while I was prepping dinner, my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "Maya, you look most beautiful when you're terrified. Stop hiding." My heart pounded erratically. The spoon I was holding clattered to the floor. Trembling, I handed the phone to Henry. He read it, his face draining of color, the veins popping on his forehead. He's really crossed the line. Henry gritted his teeth. "I'm calling the police." "Are you sure?" I looked at him, my eyes welling with tears. "If you're not going to go all the way, don't promise me again. I don't have the strength to take any more." Henry pulled me into a hug, his voice choking. "I am not backing down this time. I swear it to you." I looked at him. I saw no hesitation in his eyes, only resolve. But I also knew that doing this meant he had to face off against his parents and accept the permanent fracturing of his family. That night, we slept fitfully. Around 2 a.m., a loud noise echoed from outside the door. I shot up, my heart feeling like it was going to leap out of my chest, the sound of metal scraping against metal. The deadbolt shaking violently. I shook Henry in a panic. He quickly pulled up the exterior camera feed on his phone. The screen clearly showed Quinn's silhouette, holding what looked like a crowbar, aggressively trying to pry the door open. "Oh my God, he's completely lost it," I screamed, tears streaming down my face. Henry immediately dialed 911, but right at that moment, a massive crash echoed through the room. The door burst open. Quinn lunged in like a madman, his eyes bloodshot, his breathing heavy. "Maya! I told you! You can't escape me!" he roared, his eyes wild and unhinged. I let out a blood-curdling scream, backing into the corner of the wall. Henry threw himself in front of me, yelling, "Quinn, stop right there! If you take one more step, you are dead to me." But Quinn didn't listen. He violently shoved past Henry, lunging straight for me. In that chaotic moment, I thought it was the end. But Henry tackled him, pinning him back. The two brothers engaged in a brutal struggle. Furniture crashed to the floor. Screams and shouts echoed through the small apartment. Trembling, my hand gripped a large kitchen knife I had managed to snatch from the counter. A thought flashed through my mind. If he gets away from Henry, I have to defend myself. The sound of police sirens wailed in the distance, rapidly getting louder. Quinn heard them. He tore himself violently from Henry's grip, his eyes flashing with a psychotic rage. He sprinted for the door, leaving behind one last threat. "Maya, you'll see. I'm not giving up." The door slammed shut. I slumped onto the floor, my entire body shaking, drenched in cold sweat. Henry hugged me tight, both of us sobbing, unable to speak. A few minutes later, the Chicago police arrived. Henry gave his statement and handed over all the video footage as evidence. The responding officer took notes, his voice stern. "This is no longer a domestic dispute. This is home invasion, stalking, and poses a severe threat to life. We are taking this very seriously." Hearing that, I felt a mix of relief and terror. Finally, the truth was out in the open, but simultaneously, I knew that once Quinn was pushed to his absolute limit, he would become even more unhinged. The next morning, when the news broke that Quinn had been brought in for questioning, Martha called Henry, wailing and screaming. "How dare you call the cops on your own brother? He's young. He just made a stupid mistake. How could you do this to him?" Henry remained silent, then spoke with absolute finality. "I had no other choice, Mom. He broke down my door. He threatened my wife's life. I have to protect my family." I sat beside him, listening to my mother-in-law sobbing on the phone, my heart aching and completely torn. I loved her, but I couldn't let myself be destroyed just out of love for her. That day, I walked out onto the balcony and looked down at the crowded Chicago streets. My heart was incredibly heavy. I knew the storm wasn't over. Quinn wouldn't just accept this. But at least this time, I wasn't alone. Henry had actually stood by my side, and the law was finally intervening. Deep down, I felt a mix of fear and sheer determination. I wasn't going to let myself collapse. If fate dragged me into this war, I was going to fight until the very end to reclaim my peace. And I knew that the coming days would be the most brutal of my entire life. After the night Quinn broke the door down, our small apartment felt like a war zone. I could barely sleep. Every sound in the hallway made my heart clench, but at least I wasn't alone anymore. The police opened a formal case and brought Quinn in for interrogation. Henry handed over every single video file, his voice thick with emotion. "This isn't just harassment. He has crossed the line. He's a threat to my wife's safety. Please handle this to the fullest extent of the law." I sat next to him, tears welling in my eyes, my hands gripping his tight. It was the first time I had seen my husband act so decisively. But I also knew that from this moment on, the rift between him and his family would be irreparable. Sure enough, when the news reached my in-laws, an absolute hurricane erupted. Robert called Henry, his voice heavy. "You are an ungrateful son. You can't even handle your own brother, so you drag the police into it. Do you want to see this family destroyed?" Henry was silent for a long time, then choked out, "If I didn't do this, my wife would lose her life. Do you want me to just stand by and watch?" The other end of the line went dead silent, but I clearly heard a heavy sigh, followed by the cold click of the phone hanging up. Martha called me, crying and full of reproach. "Maya, how could you do this to your brother-in-law? It was just a temporary lapse in judgment. You brought the cops into this. When people find out, how is this family going to show its face in public?" I swallowed the bitterness. tears streaming down my face. "Mom, I have endured too much. I had no other choice. I didn't want to break the family apart, but if I kept quiet, I might not even be alive to talk to you today." The phone went silent. I knew that no matter how much I explained, in their eyes, I would forever be the villain who destroyed their family. In the days that followed, Quinn was repeatedly summoned for questioning, but every time he returned from the precinct, he became more sullen and dangerous. There were no more direct, threatening text messages. Instead, there was an eerie, terrifying silence. Henry warned me to be hyper-vigilant, to always keep my phone on me, and to avoid going out alone. But sometimes, silence is even more horrifying than open threats. One evening, when we came home from work, there was a cardboard box sitting right outside our apartment door. I shivered. Henry quickly opened it to check. Inside was a piece of lingerie that belonged to me. I stood frozen, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Henry clenched his fists, his face turning red with fury. "He's still tracking us," Henry muttered, his voice hoarse. I burst into tears, covering my face. That sick, twisted gift was a reminder that I was not safe. Quinn was still lurking somewhere, watching, waiting. Henry immediately called the police. They documented and confiscated the box as evidence, but it was agonizingly clear that the law couldn't instantly stop an obsessed stalker. A few days later, while I was out getting groceries, I suddenly heard footsteps following closely behind me. I turned around, and my heart stopped. Quinn was standing there in a baggy jacket, his eyes bloodshot, a faint smirk on his face. I panicked and bolted, running as fast as I could while calling Henry. By the time Henry arrived, Quinn had vanished into the crowd. That night, I sat holding my head, shaking. I can't take this anymore. He's going to do something completely out of control. Henry hugged me tight, his voice raspy. "No matter what, I'm going to protect you. Trust me." But the fear inside me wouldn't subside. And then, exactly what I feared most happened. Another evening, when Henry was held up late at a corporate meeting, I was home alone. The apartment was dead silent. I was sitting on the couch when I heard a loud squeak from the balcony sliding door. My heart jumped into my throat. I ran over and saw that the glass balcony door was being pried open. A dark shadow lunged inside. It was Quinn. He stepped forward, his eyes burning with a psychotic intensity, his voice raspy. "Maya, you can't escape me. I told you." I screamed, backing into the corner, grabbing anything I could find to fight back. Quinn charged forward, grabbing at me. In the chaotic struggle, I managed to yank my arm free. I grabbed a glass vase and smashed it as hard as I could onto the floor. The deafening shatter echoed through the room. At that exact moment, the front door burst open. Henry charged in, his eyes bloodshot, screaming, "Quinn, you son of a bitch!" He threw himself at Quinn, tackling him to the floor. The two struggled violently. I shook violently, screaming for the neighbors. Frantic footsteps echoed in the hallway. People rushed over to witness the horrifying scene. Quinn was pinned down by Henry, his face contorted, but his eyes were still locked onto me. He screamed, "She belongs to me. No one can take her away from me." The scene left everyone in shock. A neighbor immediately called 911. When the Chicago PD arrived, Quinn was restrained and hauled away. I slumped onto the floor, tears pouring out, my whole body shivering. Henry hugged me tight, his voice hoarse. "It's over. Don't be scared anymore. I'm here." But deep down, I knew it wasn't entirely over. Would a man so obsessed easily give up, even when bound by the law? And I also knew that after tonight, my in-laws' family would be completely shattered. Outside, police sirens wailed into the night. I sat shivering in Henry's arms, my heart heavy. The massive storm had finally erupted, and its aftermath would haunt us for a very long time. The night Quinn was taken away by the police, our small apartment descended into a heavy, oppressive silence. I sat on the couch, my whole body shaking, my hands freezing cold even though Henry was holding me tight, trying to comfort me. The sirens faded into the distance, but their echo still vibrated in my chest. I knew that from this point forward, the page had turned to a new, devastating chapter. The next morning, The police arrived to take further statements. Trembling, I recounted everything from the early days of Quinn, trying to get into my room, the videos I had recorded, to him brazenly breaking down the door and climbing onto the balcony. Repeating every detail felt like rubbing salt into an open wound, but I understood that if I wanted protection, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Henry sat next to me, holding my hand, his gaze resolute. For the first time, I saw no hesitation in him. When the news reached his parents, a real hurricane struck. Martha fainted and had to be taken to the emergency room by the neighbors. Robert went completely silent. His hair seemed to turn completely white overnight. Henry told me that in his father's eyes, there was an unspeakable shame and agony. But what choked me up the most was Martha's weak, pleading voice on the phone. "Maya, forgive him just this once. He's young. He just made a mistake." I burst into tears, choking on my words. "Mom, I forgave him too many times. If I forgave him again, I would be dead. I can't do it anymore." The other end of the line went silent, save for muffled sobbing. I knew she loved her youngest son more than anything, but the naked truth could not be denied. In the days that followed, the Cook County State's attorney officially filed charges for criminal trespass, breaking and entering, and stalking. Quinn was held in county jail pending investigation. As the news spread, the neighbors in Oak Park buzzed with gossip. Everyone was shocked. A respectable family, torn apart by an unbelievable tragedy. Henry was devastated. He lost an extreme amount of weight, sitting silently for hours with hollow eyes. I understood his pain. On one side was his wife, on the other his blood brother, now a criminal. But amidst that storm, he still held my hand and whispered, "No matter what happens, I'm never letting you go again." Those words brought me to tears. At least, after everything, we still had each other. One afternoon, I went back to Wisconsin to visit my parents. The moment I walked through the door, I bawled like a child. My mom hugged me tight, her voice shaking. "My poor girl, why is your life so hard? Why did you have to fight through this storm all by yourself?" I buried my face in her shoulder, sobbing. "I was so scared, Mom. But I had no other choice." During the days I spent with my parents, my heart calmed down a bit. But when I returned to the apartment, the trauma was still there. I knew that even though Quinn was locked up, the mental scars would run deep forever. Then came the court date. The courtroom was packed. Quinn was brought in, his face gaunt, but his eyes still burned with that same twisted, sick obsession. When he saw me, he smirked. "Maya, you'll never escape me." I shuddered, but Henry immediately squeezed my hand tight, his eyes blazing with fury. In front of the judge, the videos I had recorded were played one by one. Every image flashed on the screen like a knife slicing into the heart of the family. Martha fainted in the gallery. Robert kept his head bowed. Henry held his head in his hands, tears falling. Ultimately, the court handed down the verdict. Quinn was sentenced for his crimes and ordered to undergo mandatory psychiatric treatment at a state facility. The courtroom went dead silent. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, feeling a mixture of profound pain and immense relief. When it was all over, Henry held my hand and whispered, "I'm so sorry for being so weak. If you hadn't been so resilient, the truth would never have come out. From now on, I will live my life to protect you. I will never hesitate again." I looked at him, my vision blurred with tears, but my heart felt lighter. Even though the road ahead was fraught with difficulty, at least I had stepped out of the darkness. Months later, we moved again, far away from the old neighborhood. Our new life wasn't luxurious, but it was peaceful. I started meditating, reading, and finding my balance. Henry changed too. He paid much more attention to me and never left me alone. Sometimes, the old memories would flood back and make me shudder, but I learned how to face them. I learned how to let go. I realized the past couldn't be erased, but it could become a lesson. One day, I went back to visit my in-laws. Martha had lost so much weight, her hair entirely white. She held my hand, her eyes welling with tears. "I'm sorry. I blamed you unjustly for so long. Now I understand what you had to endure." I hugged her and cried. Even though the wounds were still there, I chose to forgive. because I knew that forgiveness wasn't for others. It was so I could finally find my own peace. My story didn't have a perfect ending, because a family had been broken, but at least I had saved myself, and I had kept my husband's love. I learned that in life, sometimes you have to face the absolute darkest depths before you realize the true value of simple, everyday light. I stood on the balcony of our new apartment, looking out at the blue sky, and took a deep breath. I told myself that no matter how much the past hurt, I had to keep moving forward, because life is long, and I deserved to be at peace. After that fateful trial, I thought my life would finally return to normal. Quinn had been sent away for mandatory psychiatric treatment. My husband's family was shattered, but at least the truth was out in the open. Henry and I had moved to a new place, far away from that haunted house. Every morning, I would open the balcony door, take a deep breath, and silently pray for days of uninterrupted peace. At first, everything seemed fine. Henry was much more attentive and always tried to make up for what happened. He cut back on his out-of-state travel and came home on time every night. I gradually regained my balance, returned to work, met up with friends, and tried to erase the horrific memories. But trauma isn't easily erased. Just a strange silhouette walking down the street, or an unexpected knock on the door late at night, was enough to make me jump and break out in a cold sweat. One afternoon, coming home from the grocery store, I stepped out of the elevator and froze. Slipped under the crack of our apartment door was a small piece of paper. I bent down to pick it up, my hands trembling as I read the jagged handwriting. "Maya, I'm still watching you." I was dead inside. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. My legs turned to jelly. I slumped to the floor, my hands shaking as I clutched the note. Henry came home, saw me sitting on the floor in front of the door, and panicked. I handed him the paper, my voice quivering. "Look at this. He hasn't let me go." Henry crumpled the paper, his eyes bloodshot. He sprinted downstairs to demand answers from the building concierge and check the lobby security cameras. But it was useless. No one knew who left the note. In the days that followed, I lived in a haze of panic. There were no more texts, no more calls, just tiny, terrifying signs. A window would be unlatched, even though I clearly remembered locking it. A dark shadow would flash by in the hallway. Strange footsteps in the middle of the night. It could have been hallucinations, but to me, they were like razor blades slicing at my nerves. One day, my best friend Lauren came over to visit. When I told her, she frowned. "Maya, you have to be careful. Who knows if he's really locked up tight, or if he has someone else purposely trying to scare you." "But who would do that?" I whispered, my eyes filling with tears. "Lauren, I'm so scared." Lauren squeezed my hand and promised, "I'm staying with you for a few days. At least you won't be alone." Having Lauren around made me feel slightly better, but it only lasted a few days before another incident struck. That evening, while we were eating dinner, the doorbell rang. Henry went to open it, then stepped back, his face ghostly pale. Sitting on the floor outside the door was a small box. Henry carefully opened it. Inside was an old, vintage doll. Its eyes were sunken, and scrawled across its chest, in red marker, was my name, Maya. I let out a blood-curdling scream and nearly passed out. Lauren held me tight, while Henry, shaking with rage, immediately called the police. They arrived, inspected the scene, and took the box. But just like before, the clues were frustratingly vague. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I just stared blankly at the front door, my heart incredibly heavy. I wondered if Quinn had somehow gotten out, or if someone was acting as his proxy to continue haunting me. The next day, Henry went to the state psychiatric facility where Quinn was committed to demand answers. But the response he got only tangled his mind further. Quinn is still here. He hasn't left the facility. His psychological state is highly unstable. He's in and out of lucidity. There is absolutely no way he left. Henry came home, looking gaunt. He choked out, "Then who is doing all of this? Who left the notes? The box?" Hearing that, my body went limp. If it wasn't Quinn, then who was it? Or did Quinn hire someone on the outside to do it for him? The anxiety robbed me of my appetite and my sleep. My nerves were stretched as tight as piano wire. Another afternoon, coming home from work, I walked into the apartment and froze in my tracks. Sitting perfectly on my vanity table was a fresh, blood-red rose, still wet with dew. I had never bought flowers, nor had I ever put any in a vase. I screamed hysterically, my limbs giving out. Henry rushed in, saw the scene, and immediately pulled me into his arms. His voice was shaking. "That's it. I'm installing cameras in every room. I'll hire private security if I have to. I am not letting you live in fear anymore." But I knew that no matter how many layers of security we had, the terror inside me couldn't be erased. Because the person planting this nightmare, whether it was Quinn or someone else, was still lurking out there somewhere. That night, I sat quietly by the window, looking down at the empty Chicago street, my heart heavy. I asked myself if my life would ever truly be peaceful, or if this obsession would haunt me forever. Henry sat down next to me, taking my hand. His voice was resolute. "Whoever this is, I will find them. But you have to believe one thing. You are not alone anymore. I will never let go of your hand." I looked up at him, tears falling. Deep down, I felt a mix of terror and comfort. This war was probably not over, but at least I had an anchor. And I realized that sometimes, trauma doesn't just come from one specific person, but from the wounds that haven't had time to heal. To escape, I had to learn to be stronger, to face it, instead of just running away. I took a deep breath, telling myself that even if darkness still surrounded me, I absolutely had to keep moving forward, because I deserved to live in the light. From the day that blood-red rose appeared on my vanity, my sleep completely vanished. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just a sick, twisted prank, that Quinn was still locked in the facility and couldn't possibly get out. My logic told me that, but my heart could not find peace. Every time I looked at that flower, my heart went cold, as if someone was standing somewhere, monitoring my every breath. Henry installed 4 more cameras around the apartment, feeding directly to his phone. He changed all the locks and added interior deadbolts. But I knew perfectly well that safety is sometimes just a thin veneer. An obsessive enough person could find a way to bypass anything. One night, while Henry was working at his desk, I sat zoning out by the window. The night was dead silent, save for the howling wind. Suddenly, from the courtyard of the apartment complex down below, I saw a figure in a black jacket standing, staring straight up at our balcony. My heart seized, my throat tightened. I quickly called for Henry. When he ran over to look, the dark shadow had disappeared. "Maybe your eyes are playing tricks on you," Henry whispered, but his clenched fists betrayed his tension. "No, I am certain someone was looking up here." I trembled. His eyes looked like they wanted to devour me. Henry didn't say anything else. He just wrapped his arms tightly around me. But from his eyes, I knew he was terrified, too. The next day, we went back to the facility to check on Quinn's status. The doctor confirmed Quinn was still there, his mental state erratic, experiencing episodes of delirium. He had definitely not left the grounds. I shuddered, listening to this. If Quinn was truly still there, then what were all the signs outside? Who left the note, the doll, the rose? Or was it all a plot orchestrated by Quinn, executed by someone on the outside? Leaving the hospital, I saw a scene that sent a chill down my spine. Quinn was sitting in a glass-walled room, staring blankly ahead. But when I accidentally turned back, I saw his lips twitch into a smirk, his eyes flashing with a bizarre, sinister glint. I shivered and pulled Henry's arm, hurrying away, not daring to look back. In the days that followed, things grew even more bizarre. One afternoon, coming home from work, the apartment door was unlocked. I was absolutely certain I had locked it thoroughly that morning. My heart raced. My hands shook as I pushed the door open. Inside, everything was exactly as we left it. Nothing was missing, except for one chilling, abnormal detail. On the dining table sat a half-full glass of tap water, and it was still warm. I screamed, tears bursting from my eyes. Someone had clearly come into my home, sat right here, casually drank water, and left. Henry ran home. Seeing the scene, his face went pale. He hurriedly checked the camera feeds, but shockingly, all the footage from that entire afternoon had been completely wiped blank. He gritted his teeth, slamming his fist onto the table. Someone hacked the system. This isn't a coincidence anymore. I slumped into a chair, my whole body giving out. I felt like prey being hunted, and the hunter was hiding somewhere, playing a sick game of cat and mouse. Lauren, hearing the news, rushed over to stay with us. She frowned. Maya, I think there's someone else besides Quinn. What if someone in the hospital is conspiring to help him? You need to brace yourself. I stayed silent, just covering my face and crying. I had no strength left to speculate. That night, as the three of us sat in the living room, the doorbell suddenly rang. We all looked at each other, our hearts stopping. Henry went to the peephole. He froze, then turned around. There's no one there. But the bell kept ringing. Frantic, rapid ringing. I trembled, gripping Lauren's hand tight. When Henry finally threw the door open, the hallway was completely empty. Only a small piece of paper sat on the threshold. Henry can't protect you forever. I nearly collapsed. Tears poured out. Lauren screamed, "This is not a joke anymore. Maya, you have to call the police right now." Henry hugged me, his voice raspy. "I won't let you be in danger, but someone is definitely playing games with us." I didn't sleep that entire night. I just stared at the piece of paper, my mind a complete mess. If it wasn't Quinn, then who was it? Another sick, obsessed stalker, or was it Quinn's hand, reaching out from confinement? Inside me, a new terror was growing. I realized this nightmare hadn't ended at all. It was just beginning another, deeper, darker cycle, and I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. I sat in the quiet room, the ticking clock hammering directly into my chest. The past few days had felt like a nightmare that would never end. The eyes, the voices, every gesture from my husband and his family echoed in my head like a film on repeat that I had no way of turning off. I thought I had grown used to the trauma, but the final, deepest cut pushed me to the absolute edge of my endurance. After that night, everything burst. My husband revealed his true nature, greedy, cold, and callous enough to willingly trample all over our marriage. I knew that if I stayed silent today, I would never have the chance to stand tall in front of him and his family ever again. The next morning, I decided to leave that house. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't hold on. I packed my clothes, picked up my child, and walked out the door. When I closed that door behind me, I also closed a bitterly painful chapter of my life. My mother-in-law was stunned, and my husband screamed and blamed me. But it was all too late. For the first time, my heart felt strangely at peace. I returned to my parents' house in a quiet town in Wisconsin. A small, old house, but overflowing with love. My parents welcomed me with warm arms, not a single word of reproach. I sat down, rested my head on my mother's shoulder, and bawled like a little girl. All the humiliation, all the repressed agony, was finally poured out. In the days that followed, I focused on my work, raising my child, and rebuilding a new life. I realized that happiness is not something you beg others to grant you. It is something you must find and build yourself, with your own two hands and your own willpower. As for my husband, I heard news that his life rapidly spiraled downward. After his true colors were exposed, his career took a nosedive. The people who once sucked up to him turned their backs, leaving him to struggle alone. My mother-in-law fell ill, losing all her former arrogant, domineering authority. People say karma comes late, but it comes surely, and I believe that. One day, my husband came looking for me. He stood on the porch of my parents' house, looking haggard, dark circles under his eyes. He begged me for forgiveness, pleading to come back, but in my heart, everything was already dead. I looked at him calmly. There was no anger or hatred left, only an icy indifference. I shook my head slightly. It's too late. We are done here. He dropped his head and silently turned away. His silhouette stumbled and faded into the afternoon light, like a final period at the end of all the suffering I had endured. I turned around, holding my child in my arms. Looking at my little one's innocent face, I smiled. I knew that from now on, life for the two of us would be different. No more tears. No more heavy, terrifying nights. Only hope, strength, and a future waiting ahead. My story ends with a departure, but it is not running away. It is a brave action to begin a new journey. I realize that sometimes happiness does not lie in holding on, but in letting go at the right time. That is the greatest lesson I have learned. Never place your entire trust and happiness in someone else's hands. Only when you can stand firmly on your own 2 feet can you truly protect yourself and those you love. Our story concludes here, leaving behind a lingering sadness, but also serving as a profound reminder. Life is never without its storms, and sometimes it is our own family that breaks our hearts the most. But amidst all those stumbles, the most important thing is knowing how to retain your humanity, your compassion, and your self-respect. Through this story, we see that family bonds are more precious than any material wealth, and once they are shattered, they are almost impossible to repair entirely. Enduring things blindly can lead to being disrespected, but standing firm at the right moment helps us rediscover our own worth. Every family, every person needs to learn how to listen, share, and respect one another, because that is the true foundation of a lasting home. Dear viewers and friends, if you feel this story has given you a new perspective or a lesson worth reflecting on, please leave a comment below so we can discuss, share, and connect. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the Serene Golden Years channel to continue following meaningful stories that hit close to home. The lesson to take away: sometimes, instead of fighting to win or lose, we just need to dare to live true to our hearts, know when to stop, and have the courage to protect ourselves. That, in itself, is the greatest victory.